Greetings viewers and welcome to today's info sharing session. We'll be covering the sales order cycle within Sage Evolution. Now there are a couple of processes that can be used when processing sales orders within Evolution, and we'll be discussing those options today. So firstly, if I go to my order entry, I'm going to go to my transactions and to sales order. When opening up the sales order, you'll see we have a couple of options. There's place order, quote, and process. So firstly, we'll start off with the quotation feature, whereby in many instances, your organization may be contacted by clients who request quotes for certain purchases. You would then process a quotation, and then upon acceptance of the quote by the customer, you could then convert that quotation to a sales order, and from there convert that sales order into a sales order invoice. So I'm going to specify firstly the customer, and on my line items, I'm simply going to go specify the items that I'm going to be, or the client is requesting a quotation for. Specify the details, quantity to be ordered, quoted, and got my pricing information there. And let's just go, for example, the next item. Right, so I've got my quotation there, I've got my sales order number currently, and I'm going to specify, click on the quote. I'm now going to go print the quotation, and on the quotation I've got details. I've got my sales order quotation number, details of the customer, and the items that make up the quotation. Right, so I can then use that option and process the quote. And you'll notice is that the quotation has been saved, the sales order quotation number. So perhaps the client then accepts the quotation, and I can now go ahead and convert that quotation into a sales order. So on my sales order screen, I'm going to go to open, and I'm going to find, and it stays, I'm going to look for the quotation option and locate the quotation based on the transaction date and click on the find button. So as you can see here, I've got my sales order quotation number, I've got the quotation, and now I'm going to select the quotation and convert the transaction into a sales order. So I've now got my sales order, and I'm simply going to specify place order and convert that quotation to sales order. Right, so that's the first process. Now, finally, I can then convert the sales order into a sales order invoice. So when the goods are being delivered to the customer, I'm going to generate the invoice. I'm going to say sales order and open sales order, specify the transaction date, and you'll see that I now have an unprocessed sales order. There's my sales order number. So I'm select the unprocessed sales order, and I'm going to confirm the quantity. So in this case, the quantity was 5. I'm going to confirm 5 quantities. And the second line, I'm going to convert the 8 quantities that are requested. At this particular point, the goods are now ready to be delivered to the customer. So I'm going to say process. I've now got my sales order. I've got my invoice number, confirm quantities, and process the transaction. At this point, I can go print the picking slip, which gives me details of the item together with the quantity required. I can also go print the delivery note, and I've got details of the items that are going to be delivered together with the total of the delivery note. Finally, I can then go and print the sales order invoice, which is a document that will accompany the goods when they are delivered to the customer. So print the sales order invoice, and I've got my details there. And you'll see that the information appears on the document. So that's really the process of including a quotation, sales order, and then sales order invoice. Now, there could be instances perhaps where you are not going to be using the quotation. So it's simply a case of going to the specifying the customer. Once again, the items that are going to form part of the sales order. And we've got the details there. And then we can just add additional items as required. Just go change that slightly. Quantity. And I've now got my sales order. So I can place the order. And then the next phase would simply be to convert the sales order into a sales order invoice. So once again, open. Now going to go and locate the unprocessed sales order. There we have it, unprocessed sales order. There's my sales order number. And I'm going to confirm the quantities. In this case, the full quantities. There's my invoice information and process the transaction. Once again, I've got the ability to print the picking slip with details of the items, the quantity required. Delivery note. And then I can go print the sales order invoice. Right, there's the details. So in this particular instance, I've used the sales order together with a sales order invoice. Now, there could be instances where perhaps, although the customer's ordered a certain quantity, due to perhaps out of stock situations, only a portion of that order can be delivered at a specific point in time. So let's just look at the partial processing feature. So I'm going to go to my specifier customer and specify the items that are going to form part of the order. So in this particular instance, the customer's ordered 6 units of item on the first item and 18 units of the second item. Right, so I'm going to process or go ahead and place the order. We have my sales order number. And our next phase would then be to go convert the order into a sales order invoice. Now, as I mentioned, it's possible that maybe there's insufficient stock to complete the whole order. So I can simply do a partial processing. So under open, I'm now going to go to sales order, locate the unprocessed sales order. And you'll notice is that quantity orders was 6. However, for example, I may only be able to confirm, for example, 5 of those units. And on line 2, only, for example, 15. So in this instance, 6 ordered, I can deliver 5. In this instance, 18 ordered, 15 to be delivered. And really it's a case of processing the transaction. The picking slip is going to give me details of the quantity required. In my delivery note, details of the quantity. So as you can see here on the delivery note, I've got details of the quantity ordered, in this case 6 and 18. Previously, there was no prior transactions on this document. However, currently now I'm delivering 5 on line 1 and 15 units on line 2. And once again, we've got details of our invoice together with the items that are going to be delivered or invoiced on the sales order invoice. Right, so that has completed a portion of the order. And now at a later stage, I may have the ability to, the stock quantities have now been replenished, and I can now complete that partially processed order. I'm going to go back into Open. And what you notice is that under the status, we've got the ability to view or locate item orders that are unprocessed, partially processed, unprocessed, and partially processed. So I've got those options. I'm going to use the All feature and my transaction date. And you'll notice is that I've got my sales order and the state being partially processed. So the line above being my same sales order number, there's my invoice number, where a portion of those items were delivered, and I've specified the item or delivery note number has been specified. In this particular instance, partially processed, and I'm going to now complete that order. So select the particular sales order. You see that we've got quantity. Initially, it was a quantity ordered 6. 5 were previously processed. And now I'm going to convert or confirm the remaining item. On line number 2, 18 ordered. 15 previously processed. And now I can then go and confirm the remaining 3 items. Invoice number, my sales order number, and the order has now been completed. So process the sales order, invoice. On the picking slip, I've got my required details. And on the delivery note, I now have the ordered quantity, the previously processed quantity, and now we're going to deliver the remaining quantity. On line 2, same option applies. 18 ordered, previously 15 delivered, and the remaining 3 are now going to be delivered on the delivery note. If you look at our sales order invoice, you'll see those options are also available. Ordered, previously processed, and quantity now being invoiced. So certainly have flexibility with regards to the processing or fulfilling of partial sales orders. Now, let's just go look at one of the other options that are available. And if I specify a custom, you'll see that on going line items, I've got a reserved quantity column. So this feature allows me to reserve stock for a specific customer. So the stock is available in my warehouse. However, I'm reserving a certain portion of the stock specifically for a customer sales order. Before we continue, we just need to check a couple of settings under order entries. So under order entry maintenance, under order defaults, purchase or sales orders, we need to activate the reserve stock option in order to use the reserve stock feature. So I've activated reserve stock, and I'm then going to go to my transactions and sales order. Specify the customer, and now the items that the customer is requiring. So let's just go find the items. The warehouse and the quantity ordered. And I'm going to reserve the full quantity. And then the second line, another item. And I'm also going to reserve the full quantity there. So I'm going to place the order. There's my sales order number, and you'll see that we have reserved 19 units that were ordered and 38 units for line number 2. Place the order. Now, if we then go and inquire on those items, so I'm going to go into my inventory items, and I'm going to go locate the items that form part of the sales order and where the stock has been reserved. So there's our first item. I'm just going to right click, inquire on the item. And if I go to my item information tab, you'll see that we've got under the quantity section, we've got quantity on hand being 17, quantity available being 51, and you'll notice is that there's a reserve quantity section there, which tells me the quantity reserved of that particular item. So what we have here is 70 units are physically within the warehouse. However, only 51 are available for transactions simply because 19 units have been reserved on a specific sales order. If I then go to the other item that form part of the sales order and go inquire there, you'll see that item information, the same option available. So 56 on hand, 18 are available for processing transactions, and we then have 38 units which are reserved on that particular sales order. So the reserve stock option simply allows you to really go and reserve stock for a specific customer on a sales order so that those units are kept separately and are not used in, for example, transactions for other sales orders. If we then revert back to our sales orders under transactions, I'm now going to convert that sales order to an invoice. So once again, open and find. I've got the unprocessed sales order, which I'm going to be selecting. Once again, 19 ordered, 19 reserved. I'm going to confirm the full number of units. Same for line number 2. 38 ordered, 38 reserved, 38 confirmed. And process the transaction. Details on the picking slip, the quantity required. Delivery note. I've got my details there, and go and view the sales order invoice, which would then be accompanying the goods when they're delivered to the customer. So those are the certain parameters that or sequences that can be used with sales orders, from the quotation process, converting the quote into a sales order, converting the sales order then subsequently into a sales order invoice. The second option being is that not using quotations, processing a sales order, converting the order into a sales order invoice, and then the other option being the ability to partially process sales orders, where perhaps the full quantity of the order cannot be provided at a certain point in time, so you are able to use a partial processing of sales orders. And then also the very useful feature of the ability to reserve stock. Activate reserve stock option allows you to then reserve certain quantities in a sales order specifically for a customer on their specific sales order. Now, very often you have instances whereby customers return goods and you would then need to process a credit note due to the goods being returned. So I'm going to go and close this option, and to process a credit note, we need to go to our inventory transactions, and we have a credit note option available there. Credit notes, we can then specify the details. So the easiest option here would be to go to open and locate the invoice, or the sales order invoice that relates to the particular credit note or the goods being returned. So I'm going to use a document type being invoice and SOCINV, transaction date, and I've got the find option. So as you can see, I've got details of all the transactions there, and now it's really a case of locating the specific sales order invoice that on which the goods are being returned by the customer. and very useful to use the loaders linked feature. The loaders linked feature allows you to specify, or it'll load all the lines on the particular sales order invoice, which then allows you to specify which items are being returned. So I'm going to use the loaders linked feature. And I've now got details of the line items that form part of the invoice. And now really, it's a case of specifying the quantity being returned or credited. So it's very possible in some instances, perhaps maybe only certain line items or certain quantities are being returned. So in this particular instance, 9 items were ordered or sold to the customer. However, for example, perhaps only 4 were returned and need to be credited. And in this particular instance, perhaps 5 were returned. We then have the sales order number based on the original transaction together with the invoice number. And we then have a credit note, which is going to be the reference number or the source document number for this transaction. So I've got my details there. I've specified the quantities that form part of the credit note. And I'm now going to process the transaction. Credit note, I can view the credit note information. And there we have it. There's the details of the items being returned. I've got my sales order number, the credit note, the invoice number, together with the credit note information there, and details of the items that form part of the credit note. And the process can then be completed. At this point, I've got the ability to allocate the credit note to the invoice. So I can process the allocations now, or I can process the allocations at a later stage. And always important that you allocate the credit note to the invoice so that you've got the correct allocations on the customer's account. Say no for the time being, and the process is now being completed. So when goods are returned by the customer, credit note being processed, it's really a case of locating the relevant invoice or transaction that relates to the credit note, using the loaders link feature for ease of use, specifying the quantities of items being returned, and generating the credit note, and then allocating the credit note to the invoice. And that forms part of the sales order cycle within Sage Evolution. Thank you so much for watching. It's over and out for me, and goodbye.